I can take off my head to recite Shakespearean quotations. Sorry, I had to. Hey guys! Can you tell I'm in the autumn mood here? We've got pumpkins, we've got Nightmare Before Christmas references. It's all good, you guys. I'm not crazy, I'm just crazy about fall. So today's topic is jack-o'-lanterns. Okay, so I know I say this every time that I go into one of my spiels about this, but one of the reasons I'm so obsessed with the seasonal celebrations is because I was somewhat, in certain ways, deprived of them, more so than most of my peers when I was a kid. I was raised Muslim, and we were not allowed to celebrate any of like the normal Western holidays that people grow up celebrating, including Halloween. And being this naturally seasonally obsessed person, I had to get kind of creative about how I could personally celebrate the seasons without getting in trouble for doing stuff that was associated with the traditions that I wasn't supposed to celebrate. So in my family, we were not allowed to draw faces on pumpkins. Crazy, right? Like most people are like, yeah, that's what kids do. They draw faces on pumpkins. But yeah, we were not allowed to do that. So it's kind of something that I got into when I was older. And when I first got into the Wheel of the Year a few years ago, I started it in the autumn season, mainly because the autumn season was always the one that was the most striking to me, and I was always kind of obsessed with it. And since Halloween was so prevalent around me, but I wasn't allowed to celebrate it, I had to like really find different ways of connecting with it. But it's a really easy time to connect with because at least where I live, there's so much stuff in nature that's just hanging around that you can just collect and be interested in and like decorate with that without like going into Halloween stuff. So basically the thing about jack-o'-lanterns is that they seem to be the universal symbol for the like Halloween season, but how many of us actually know the stories of where this symbol came from? Like if the people who originally came up with the concept of the jack-o'-lantern saw me with this like synthetic glittery fake pumpkin that used to light up but the battery's dead, like they'd be like, what in the world, But we take things really far nowadays, and we like to decorate. So I'm just going to kind of give you a rundown of everything that I can pull out of the filing cabinet of my brain about jack-o'-lanterns, and then I'm going to share a little bit about how I feel personally connected to the symbol, and prompt you, of course, to maybe write a book of shadows about how you feel about pumpkins and what you know about jack-o'-lanterns. So let's get into it. So, jack-o'-lanterns. One really interesting thing that I learned about jack-o'-lanterns and pumpkins in general when I started studying the Wheel of the Year was that Europe doesn't really do it. Like, it's funny because supposedly, like, this Halloween tradition came from Europe, and our main symbol for it nowadays globally is this little pumpkin with the face on it. But apparently pumpkins don't grow very well in Europe. So I actually found that out when I was doing one of my previous Wheel of the Year series, and one of my subscribers commented and was like, it's so hard for me to find pumpkins, I have to go to a certain market to get them. And I was like, really? And she was like, yeah, I'm in the UK, and we don't, when I was growing up, you really couldn't even get pumpkins at the market. They're imported now. And I was like, what? I had no idea. But the same year, I also started growing my first pumpkins, and it occurred to me maybe why. Because in England, it tends to be very gray, and I think their soil is made up of a little different composition. Whereas like where I live in New York, like we can grow amazing pumpkins. And part of it is because in the summer we do tend to get so much sunshine, and pumpkins are actually obsessed with sunshine. So that was like an interesting thing that I learned. Like, comment below actually, like how many of you who are from the US or just not up on your Europe agriculture didn't know that they don't have pumpkins. I was like astounded by that. So you might be asking yourself, if you know this tradition started in Europe but they don't have pumpkins, what did they do? Well, actually, apparently they used turnips to make a jack-o'-lantern, which turnips are much smaller and apparently they're very hard to carve. So it was like a difficult task, but they would make little jack-o'-lanterns out of turnips. So then we ask ourselves why? Why do we do this at all? Well, from my studies, now granted, history and traditions are a really interesting subject because depending on who you ask, you're going to get different interpretations, and all we can really do is put puzzle pieces together. But I've heard of a few different origins of the jack-o'-lantern, and then there's a lot of just more stuff piled onto it as the years went on. But supposedly, the first concept of the jack-o'-lantern was going all the way back to when humans were very primal, and this time of year they would gather around bonfires to keep warm. And so, as I mentioned in my previous video, one of the reasons why we globally kind of celebrate like darkness and you know, the darker aspects of human nature during this time of year is because naturally it's a time when humans become more aware of their mortality. In the summertime, when the weather is, you know, a lot more supportive of life, it's easy to kind of forget your own mortality in a way. But when the darker days start to roll in and the nights close in on you, and the nighttime animals that you don't know too much about start coming closer to your campsite, and you know the cold is starting to set in and you're trying to save your food because you can't keep growing food over the winter, stuff like that just starts to, it basically kind of just got into the collective consciousness of our species that like this is a time of year when we start thinking you know, more about the scary stuff, you know. So at some point, there were traditions around the bonfires where basically it was kind of like a celebration of what light was available because humans could create fire at that point. So there was a tradition where, well, there were all kinds of bonfire traditions going on, but at the end of the bonfire, I guess there was like the sparks of the bonfire were put into, you know, anything you could carry them in and brought back to each person's house as kind of like a good luck charm in a way to like bring that light into their home, and you know, as a symbol of like keeping their home safe and warm and bright throughout the rest of the winter. And at the time, apparently for whatever reason, it often ended up being little pieces of fruit that would get the ember into it to bring it home. And I guess at some point people started carving symbols into them and creating little lanterns out of them. And so that is supposedly where jack-o'-lanterns kind of originated from. So that's just one of the traditions, or like one of the supposed origin stories of the jack-o'-lantern. Another one originated later on, like much later on. I think this might have been 1800s or something. Maybe it was before that, but like it wasn't anywhere, like it was, this is like a post-Christian takeover concept. It's not like from like way back in the pagan days. But supposedly there was a guy named Jack-o'-lantern, and he was so evil and bad, and he was a criminal, and I guess I don't know if he got sentenced to death or if he just eventually died or whatever, but he was so bad that the devil wouldn't even have him in hell. And so he got sent back to earth as like this evil spirit, and on his way out, like the devil kicked a spark from like the hell fires at him, and he ended up carrying it with him inside of a little turnip, and he would walk around with it and do bad stuff back on Earth. So yeah, if you want to hear like the whole version of that, you'd have to look it up, because that's just the watered down part of it that I remember. So supposedly people would put jack-o'-lanterns in their windows to like confuse him or like ward him off or something like that. Not entirely sure of how that whole thing worked out, but that is a popular myth of the jack-o'-lantern as well. Let's see, what else do we know about you, little guy? Well, I've already talked about pumpkins. Like not jack-o'-lanterns, but pumpkins in general, on my blog. A couple weeks ago I did a blog post about why we're so obsessed with pumpkins, why we have pumpkin spice everything, and all of that kind of stuff this time of year. Because pumpkins themselves are a symbol of abundance, because as a huge winter squash that doesn't rot very easily if you don't carve into it, you can actually keep it for pretty much the entire winter. So that would be a good thing that you could have. If you didn't own a refrigerator, you best have some pumpkins in your pantry, because they won't go bad very quickly. Let's just talk about the face of a jack-o'-lantern. The face vaguely resembles a skull. That was the original point of it. Like, obviously, since you're carving into a pumpkin, it kind of ended up having like an angular shape to it, because it's kind of hard to carve into pumpkins. So we tend to think of them as having like more triangular features and like square features in a way, but it's really supposed to be representative of a skull face. And the reason why is because this time of year is associated with, like I said, remembering your mortality. So yes, that hollowed out image of a skull kind of tended to represent that. Obviously, the way that it ended up becoming a pumpkin is because a lot of the like stereotypical Halloween representations that we work with today were kind of Victorian inventions. So during the Victorian time, when everything was kind of like glazed over and turned into something socially acceptable, basically what they did was they took all of like the things that they were weirded out by, like their culture was weirded out by, and kind of grouped it together into, I mean, it was kind of a massive act of shadow work in a way. It was like, you know, the concept of like, how can we integrate something that's a darker aspect of our existence into something that we can kind of express in more of a healthy way. And so Halloween kind of became this celebration of all of those things. So they grouped together like the jack-o'-lantern myths and things that they were afraid of, like black cats and spiders and skeletons and, you know, all of the stereotypical, you know, the ghost with the shroud over it, like all of that kind of stuff kind of got grouped together in the Victorian age. And obviously by that time, Europeans were also in America, and pumpkins were something that the Native Americans had taught them how to grow, and so it was one of their main things for this time of year. So that all kind of just culminated and became part of the same tradition. This is a really, really loaded symbol. Like, lots of different people have different associations with it, and I would absolutely love to hear your versions of the tales that I told in this video, if you know a different version of it or have more details on that, or if you know totally different ones. We would all love to hear about those, and if you have links to like more videos you can watch or more articles on the subject, please do share those with us. And I'm just going to end off with a funny little story of how, like, what I think of when I think of jack-o'-lanterns. So, like I said, I wasn't allowed to celebrate Halloween when I was a kid, but me and my siblings had this, like, secret desire to, like, really be into it, because honestly, I think it's kind of a natural part of human nature to want to get into, like, the creepy little stories and stuff this time of year. And so one time me and my sister were just goofing around telling like our version of what we thought were scary stories, even though we didn't know very many because we weren't really allowed to be into them. So my sister told this story, and she said, I don't know, I don't even remember what happened in the story, but it was like some evil guy and something ridiculous happened and he did all these bad things, and then the story ends with "and then I die," but like it's in the first person, so like it's like he's a ghost and he's still talking to you. And then at the end of the story she says, "And that's my tale, signed Jack O'Lantern." And that's that was all I had to go off of when I was a small child, so I knew it wasn't real, she just made it up, but I thought it was so funny, and every time I saw Jack-o'-lantern I would think of that story. So if you have, like I said, any knowledge of like the actual origin stories and stuff of jack-o'-lanterns, or if you just remember something ridiculous that you did when you were a kid that had to do with jack-o'-lanterns, like that one, like connotations that you have about them, we would love to hear all of that fun stuff. So I will see you guys again very soon. We will be talking about more of the symbols of this time of year. And until then, brightest blessings and happy November Eve. If you enjoyed this video, you will love the articles and free online courses that I've put together just for magical people like us. To learn more, head over to gypsywitchdiaries.com and be sure to sign up for our weekly newsletter. Looking forward to connecting with you over there. Brightest blessings!